Hello world, Great Giza Pyramid. What I'd like to do today is first start by talking about the plateau itself. So we have the primary pyramid, which we like to call the Great Giza Pyramid. A little bit to the south of it and off to the side, we have pyramid number 2. And then we have a 3, 4, 5. We got pyramid 6, pyramid 7, 8, and 9. All these pyramids sit on the plateau, and they kind of fit this shape. You know, people can talk about it. Really, what I'm focusing on is the topology and the way the Nile was running at the time. Because for our model, we need to be consistent. So the Nile, for our model, is at an elevation. Let's see, the Sphinxy guy is over, this one goes this way, the Sphinxy guy is over here, right? So the Nile is kind of right up against it, comes around. And there are a few models, and I'm not opposed to them, where the Nile was actually at an elevation where it actually came around the whole structure, rejoined above the North Pyramid, the Prime Pyramid, and continued on. I'm fine with that as well, because that actually helps to isolate the entire circuit. But what we're going to look at, what we're going to look at is how we're going to set this up. Is we're going to build a moat around this entire pyramid, and a moat around this entire pyramid, and a moat around this entire pyramid. Not a big deal. Easily done these days. Now because, well, we'll get to that when we get to the topology. This is the way we're doing it. The spillway, because this is the most important one, is located right here where that special rock they have, the dark rock. And we're going to utilize all the features of the topology already there. You notice right here is where the rocks are kind of carved like that. And on this side, it kind of looks like it has teeth. We're going to set something up so that when you pull on it, it rides up on the rock to allow water to spill out from underneath it. This way, the surface stays as flat as possible, as often as possible. It actually comes out from underneath it. And that's our spillway. And that'll spill back out. See, it'll be blue. Back out into the Nile and join up with the Nile and continue on. So, now, what else are we going to have? We'll work out the fine details later. If you're really interested in why the exact configuration is the way it is, I urge you to look at Carl Monk's book, and I have his video on my playlist of the code, and it will explain both this structure and a couple others that exist on the planet. When I say a couple, I mean a bunch. Now, when we look at these same exact 3 structures on the topology of this area, because the distance is so great, we're actually dealing with the curvature of the Earth. In fact, it has been said, although I don't quite understand the math, that the Giza Pyramid, which is supposed to be like 700 and some feet wide, in its construction deviates from the point where it, at the highest elevation where it touches the Earth to the lowest elevation, is 2 levels. And that doesn't make sense because the average level is around 25, I think it was centimeters. So that would be 50 centimeters. That's a big chunk of change, the curvature of the Earth, which is supposedly like, what, 8 inches every mile. So I don't quite agree with that. But I do agree that they used the structure itself to be the foundation on the pyramid. And what they may be taking into account is that the area in the center that they like to call the grotto is actually artificially elevated, so the bottom of the pit in the grotto is actually ground level. But we're going to build that since this is what we're working on. So let's make and stretch this whole thing out flat instead of curved, because it's going to be a lot easier to pay attention to. Now, one thing that I'm not making up is that the Great Giza Pyramid, while it is the tallest of the pyramids from ground level up, the second pyramid over is at a higher elevation, and the third one is at a higher elevation yet. So, while this pyramid is actually taller, it is actually shorter because it's at higher. And then this one is there. Now, I'm not really worried the exact heights, although I think I did a pretty good job for what I want. But what we're going to do is we're going to map everything up to the niche in the Queen's Chamber. All of it. 1, 2, 3. Actually, let me make the niche higher just so I can work with it. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. And down and over. Okay. So that's the niche. The second row, that is going to be the elevation of the water around this moat, which actually, because of its elevation, is only like a very, very, very shallow pool. But regardless, it's there. The second niche down, oh, I did miss one. The second niche down, that one is the elevation of this pool. So it's a tiny bit lower. And I also need to cut this off a bit because of the structure underneath it, how it works. Alright, and then the third one is the elevation of I was incorrect, and I was correct. The top one is the elevation of this pool. Second one is the elevation of this pool. Third one is the elevation of this pool. And the fourth one, which there is a fourth step, is the mean, and we'll get to that in a second. The opening that's in there goes down like so, and the water level inside the pyramid is maintained at that elevation, and we'll get to how in a second, because, well, I'll give you a little quickie. Where the spillway is on this side, we use a lock system, which is, I'm sure some of you have seen that little drawing, okay? If not, there's a picture of it, but you're not sure quite how it means. Well, we're going to double the pressure, hence the markings slight above it, of that water. And we'll really get to that when we get to the mechanics. We're setting up the system, and I don't want to jump ahead. So here we go. Level of the moat outside, level of the moat around the second one down is the second pyramid, and the third one down, that one's building 7. That one is the lowest of them. So in reality, the way I drew it, this one is higher. Sorry. Pyramid 1, Pyramid 2, Pyramid 7. There's a reason I call it Building 7, because Building 7 is very important. You should type that into your favorite search engine and learn about Building 7. But what other things that are very important to look at about these structures is this pyramid, for the most part, I'm going to use a unit number because I'm not going to argue over inches. Inside or the outside of the structures, this one, we're going to say, for the sake of argument, the 35th level here, whereas the tallest, well, hypothetically, the tallest jump and is at the same elevation, almost did it perfect, as the top of the Queen's Chamber, that is going to be 1 unit. Everything above here, for right now, we're going to say is 1/2 unit, all the way up to the top. Everything below here, we're going to say is 4/5 unit. Below here is more like 7/8. And the last one is actually 1.25. It is actually taller than this, but they don't like to point that out. This is the ring around the structure. Now on this structure, the bottom part that is at the same elevation of this, how they have the scoop that goes down and goes back up and then goes down. You know that bit? Okay. This elevation here is the top part here. This is going to be 4/5 units. And then from here up is going to be like 3/5. And at the top part about here, they kind of does a little split. From there, it's going to be 2/5 until you get to this spot above the elevation of the other unit, and then from there, it's like at 1. Well, it's practically 0. It's practically smooth. And you notice on one of the sides, there's a ground that comes down and shorts out to there. And we'll get to why. And here's a course level change between the 3/5 and 4/5. This whole thing is at 4/5. 4/5 unit. This jumps, the steps. At all points, any ambient static that come to rest on this structure will be distributed smoothly and evenly up into the ether. This is your ground, your norm, your mean. This is the 0 point. Okay? Any ambient static electricity that comes to land on here, depending on where it comes to land, here will be resistant from going down, ushered up to the top, and vented off. This, compared to the mean, will be positive. This is slightly more positive than the mean, but not a lot. So we'll say this is positive, and this is just positive. This is equal to the mean, so that will be 0. This structure, because of the 35th level being a ring around the entire structure, and the ambient static electricity that lands on this structure would normally vent off, just like that structure. Especially since they're at a like elevation. We're talking within only 3-4 feet here. This is just taller, but this one has a rock garden on the top that naturally prevents that ambient static electricity from releasing up into the ether. Now, because they got tired of people standing on here and getting all hair standing on their end and little zaps and touching each other and zapping themselves, we've put an antenna on there to relieve the static electricity. But without that, this structure all by itself grabs it. It doesn't let it ground to Earth because of this resistance factor, which is a ring around the entire structure. And then we have the moat on the outside of it. From here, this is going to be negative. I should have made that green, because this has more static electricity, and it's not being allowed to go anywhere, and it's being built up. Now, what's even better about the structure is if we were to look at the measurements of the surface of the structure, with this being the 35th level, you can see that it has a sweeping pattern. That sweeping pattern pulls the static electricity up to approximately this level. No mistake there. This level here, which just to be the opposite of that, I'm going to make green, even though this should be green and that should be red, is looking for the path of least resistance over at this beacon over here, which is begging it to come from here to there. We give it the path of least resistance by bringing it down through the system. This is how we're going to do it really quickly. We're going to take that and bring it down a conduit of mostly pure hydrogen. This conduit does not actually breach the surface of the structure. This conduit does. What do we do here? This conduit will just bring in ambient air, which is 21% oxygen. That's the important part. We're going to burn it with hydrogen in the King's chamber. What they like to call the King's chamber, I like to call it the combustion room. Now, this is going to make water. This is going to make water and steam. The steam actually is what's going to blow up into here, but it's really the hydrogen that's the important part. The steam is going to blow up into here and grab some of this static electricity, which is collected at that, and looking for the path of least resistance. We're going to bring it down steam, because steam as it condenses is going to come down. It's going to do our job for us, and more it's going to pull it into the system. From there, we're going to pull it down into the system through the Grand Gallery, and I'd be glad to work out the whole logistics of how what they like to call the antechamber is really the flashback. So it, the reaction stays there and the gas comes out here. Yeah, we can really get into that. I'm fine with that. I have other videos. In here, the condensation, you never notice how the room has funny shape, how it comes down and goes up like that. That's so any condensation comes down and runs down and will get on that edge and will drip and fall. Each time it drips and falls, it's going to bring more of the static electricity down and down and down into the system. It's an ongoing, ever-going cycle which constantly brings it down. In addition to that, there's a bunch of steam in there because we were just burning water together, so there's going to be steam. That steam is going to be condensing, turning into droplets, and as it is, it's pulling the static down. When it gets to this lower level, we can worry about the whole bit on the bottom, but let's just say there's a pool of water in there again. That steam is going to ride above the pool of water until it gets into what they like to call the Queen's chamber. I like to call that the arc chamber. We'll get into why in just a second here. All that static electricity, steam, is going to be condensing on the walls and coming down, becoming water, and washing out through the system. No big deal. The static electricity's got to go somewhere. You give it two conduits, and this is where you can talk to Chris Dunn about what exactly the conduits are filled with, but the one on the south side of the structure, the one that had the crack in the wall that kind of looked like that they drilled the hole and found the conduit. Before electricity, we didn't understand what an electrical crack looked like from years and years of sparks going through that wall. But anyway, that electricity is going to jump into that conduit, which is actually shorted to this pyramid with a battery that they like to call the mass burial chamber. It's that room that has 20 individual cells all lined up at the exact same elevation, so that if you tilted it horizontally the way it is instead of laying it flat, it would be a perfect battery, a battery so big that people walk through it, and it doesn't have to hold a lot of voltage. I believe we're only talking, not a lot of voltage, but it can hold a massive amount of it. That's a big battery. So anyway, so it's shorted to that battery. And the other side that is your ground. That one comes out and it actually comes to here. Now you're teasing the electricity building up in that room, the static electricity. It wants to go to here. It sees the resistance, but it knows it can get out. That is the ground. That is the neutral. That is the mean. But you give it something which has a higher draw, but a larger capacity, and you catch it in the middle. Now, we're going to utilize all the conduits that are already drawn or already dug out through the system. The plateau is littered with conduits. They are just as square and just as perfect, just as squared. Some of them are rectangular. And just as perfect as the conduits within the Giza Pyramid itself. They already exist on the plateau. They just don't like to tell you about them. We're also going to implement in our model the fact that there are what they like to call caves under the Giza Plateau. Now, with the Nile being up against the pyramids themselves, those caves now become aquifers. And with the Nile running south to north, we get a really interesting scenario of the water running south to north as a major flow, and we have a cross flow that we artificially made by pushing the water to the side and running those conduits across that we control. Mixing these two waters and having flows go in certain ways, we make certain patterns in the magnetic flow. You know, the right-hand rule of how the electrons flow. We're going to use that energy to be the catalyst to crack the water that comes down from the moat into the bottom of the structure. Actually, the way I drew it is bad because this comes down and this doesn't. Anyway, I'm sure you're as familiar with the structure as I am. That goes down into the structure. Now, we can get into exactly how that works, but this is where we're going to break the hydrogen and the oxygen within what they like to call the subterranean structure. You can check out my video, Magic with Magnetism, or the magic behind the magnetism, or the magnetism behind the magic. That's what I actually called it. But either way, in our model, we're just going to use, I'm going to say a 9-volt battery, but really we want to be as close to nature as possible. I'd like to start with an 800 millivolt power supply and using magnetism and a couple of other things to bring the rest of it up to cracking the water, because nature provides us about 800 millivolts. But we can always add 1.5 volts and easily start cracking the water, separating it into its hydrogen and oxygen. From there, gravity, I'm going to say gravity, buoyancy, will do the rest. The oxygen comes out of the system and just goes away. The hydrogen actually comes out of the grotto chamber, which is a lead off of here. That goes up and joins there. And that is what's piped up and burnt in that chamber. That's where the hydrogen comes from. They separate it. Oxygen goes out of the system because oxygen doesn't go up. Oxygen kind of stays buoyant, stays neutral. You fill up a balloon, you let go of it, it falls. But hydrogen, what made the Hindenburg blow up? That and some thermite, but that's beside the point. Anyway, that's the basic gist of the system. This should answer all your questions. I have many other videos that go into details in each section. You're welcome to tell me where you think I'm incorrect on how I see things. And you're welcome to debate with me about what all these marks mean. But, when you really get into it and look at it, the water level in here is actually going to rise. And it's going to rise because as this condensates, you're actually going to create a vacuum in a scenario where within this whole system, you're creating the vacuum, and that's going to bring the water up, this water, and the valve that I already showed you, which equalizes the pressure, kind of like a regulator when you're going scuba diving. That will allow it to actually raise this water even though it's at a lower elevation than that water. And as it raises it, it's pushing that static up. As it pushes the static up towards the mean, it has to go somewhere. The static is getting more and more squished. And like I said, it wants to go here. You tease it over to here and catch it in the middle. I can't make it any more simple. And I can go into much more detail. Thank you. Have a nice day.